Good morning, Sandy. This is Chris. I think you're the only person not here that's not an organizer. How are you doing today? Oh, let me.
Hi, I'm good. I was just reading the last bit of the articles and enjoying this last part.
So yeah, I don't know if we'll have more people show up or if there's something from the articles that you would like to talk about, or I believe you sent me a question about one of the assignments that maybe we could, that I haven't had a chance to respond to yet. We could also talk about your questions while we wait to see if other people come. Or
Sure.
we can, you know, whatever works best for you.
Okay. Yeah, my question about the resource sharing was, so I found this website that I think is awesome, and I didn't know if I should, let me find it on my Google Doc. So I wasn't sure if I should just choose one of the activities. So it's the tryengineering.org. Have you seen this one?
Well, let me see if I can pull it up. Oops. I don't think, my Mac and I are not friends.
Sandy, I've seen, this is,
Oh, hi Pam.
Sandy, this is Pam. I know that website. I love it, the one you're talking about. I absolutely love it for my third graders.
Absolutely. I was just like, oh my gosh. So that was my resource sharing, but I didn't know if I should choose one of the activities and go through it. When I started my brief, I just told about the website.
I think that's great. You don't need to outline, like extensively outline an actual activity. You can share the website in general and explain about why kind of generally the activities are great.
Okay, and then when I tied it to the standards, I just used the standards that applied to me, but of course, you know, with the engineering design and the nature of technology and that part, I actually did the next generation science standards, and they did it for me because each activity is already tied to the standards. It's awesome.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I mean, initially we just were like, well, we really hope, because no one person can be an expert on what's out there for all 12 grade levels, that we can set up a place where everybody can find two things that they think are great, and it can be kind of a resource bucket. And we turned it into a formal assignment so that it could count, so that, you know, there was some structure to it. So the way that I would think about the assignment from your point of view is that if somebody else were doing this, well, I mean, would it be, yeah, it's the fourth grade standards. I can translate that into my other grade, and what information would I want to know about whether or not to go to this website?
Okay. Well, I will do my best.
That sounds great. Well, so we have some questions that we can all chat about, but I don't know, do you have any specific questions about this week or about this week's readings?
I thought they were really good. I don't think I have any specific. Each one, whether it be the reading or right now I'm on the Communities of Practice article, and I haven't, I'm sorry, Community of Learning. So I haven't gone through that whole one. I think I've gone through just the epistemic games and the curricular content and that part. So I'm still on the last 3 points that they were talking about, the points of change. But other than that, I've watched videos, and then of course I'm the kind of person who is going to Google stuff as I get information. I'm going to find additional resources just to learn other ways.
So as you've done that, have you found other things that are out there that will be useful for you? Because I know one of the frustrations that's been expressed in the past about the epistemic games is this is fantastic, right? Like, obviously this is really great, but it's not publicly accessible, and there's very few of them made that are kind of officially epistemic games. So what else is out there? And so I don't know, like, is that one of the things that you looked at to see what else might be out there for third grader or fourth graders?
You know, I didn't yet, but I was just trying to get some other information. So I watched Aaron Levesseur's video on Peacemaker video games and learning, and that was, I don't know, it was talking about how he uses it in 7th grade for the kids can either be a Israel leader or a Palestinian leader, and oh, it was actually a little upsetting in some ways for me because I didn't watch the whole thing because I just thought, oh, it's talking about if you do this, how many people will die, and I kind of had I kind of had a problem with that, I guess, because I don't want to have that sort of game that, I don't know, trivializes
Yeah.
the death of people, because I think a lot of video games and do that, you know, oh, we just shot this person, and I just don't want to get into, so I need to find something that's more appropriate for me that wouldn't.
Yeah, I think that's a major problem. And I admit that when I first started thinking about the use of video games in the classroom, I was really skeptical. You know, it was like the things that people were able to convince me had some tie to content tended to have something in it that I had a hard time thinking that I should bring that into my classroom, you know, like some of these games they trivialize death, or they, you know, really is every parent okay with their child being exposed to that? And then the ones that weren't were either not fun for kids or not related to content. And so I think that's one of the things that I find attractive about the epistemic games and these kind of things that have been really deliberately developed. The problem is that there's not a ton of them out there that are fantastic, you know, and so it might take some time. There's a book that I read recently, and it's really just an advertisement. I mean, it's a research document published out of Stanford, or published by somebody from Stanford out of MIT. I mean, it's all educational and research based, but it's basically an advertisement for the fact that we need to spend money making games that will do these things more appropriately, you know. And one of the things that was interesting in there is he talks about how a lot of times we can prime students with learning and then have them play a game, or prime students with a game and then have them learn. And there was one that was just fascinating, but kind of along the same lines, where it's just really kind of depressing, where they were learning about World War I, and some students learned more about the strategy, and some students learned more about the on-the-ground combat, and they found this huge correlation to which of two shoot-'em-up video games they played. You know, was it a strategy game or a hand-to-hand combat game?
Oh.
And that, you know, making this point that then if kids are playing these games at home, when they walk into our classroom, they actually are primed to learn different things. And so hopefully at 4th grade we don't have as many kids playing those games at home, although
Yes, it's pretty.
My children's teacher might have a problem because they see their older sibling play some of those games at home. But it's this whole book about kind of why we need to, why it is that we need to put money into better games for kids, because they are so powerful.
Absolutely, yes.
So anyway, well, we put together some questions that we can just kind of chat about. I actually, I mean, it's 11 after, which means maybe nobody else is going to show up today, and I have to go at 12:30 back into a presentation. And Sarah and Pam are both here, but maybe we can just kind of go through some of these questions and see. I'm hopeful that Sarah and Pam might unmute to help answer them, so that you don't feel like the question's just for you. But the first question is, for your students, what would be an authentic context for science literacy? And so when I wrote this question, I was especially thinking, we looked at the Journal of Emerging Investigators, which works for 6 to 12, but I was thinking we have a lot of elementary teachers, and so what would it mean to have an authentic context, or an authentic problem when we're in K-5 that actually involved literacy in the mix?
Give me an example.
Well, I know that in 612, I've definitely seen things like where, like in Butte, they go down and they get involved in doing tests in the mine, or they go along the Clark Fork, they'll go and do river tests and like write a letter. Like the class will have to write a letter about the results they found. And so we're really kind of engaging in that authentic problem. It's something that matters for our community. We put in an NPR quote from Sunburst, who got like a huge grant from Samsung, where they wrote a proposal to get money to study the problem up there at the salt flats that had caused a huge accident and study how to fix it, and then they have to write up a report to give to an engineering firm for how to solve the problem. And so in 612, we kind of have a lot of those where the science content we'd be working with is something that we can find a problem in our environment, figure out how to fix it, and then have to write a letter to somebody or share that publicly, so that we do have that authentic piece of science writing that's not kind of a contrived classroom assignment. But I was having trouble thinking in kindergarten through 5th, like what would be the equivalent of that when we may or may not really be in a position to be engaging in the real world in that way.
I think at least at my school, it would probably relate to our playground. Something that they go to every day. We have a walking path around our playground, and our students have realized that our walking path that is paved, it's changed the environment, because they go down out of the playground, the path does, and it goes into a water area. It's right by a little stream, and they've noticed that when they've been picking different plants, and how it's changed that environment back there, because they pick the plants and blow the seeds over, and then the next year they're like, wow, there's so many more right now.
Yeah.
And even, we added a lot of concrete, and so then now the erosion that's occurring in different places has changed our grassy area. So I would see them starting, even the little kids starting in something around them, their playground, and the people they would write to might be the principal, the school board, the PTA, those sorts of things.
I think
the little kids.
I think too, even if they were just keeping a classroom notebook, knowing that next year's class was going to use their recording, that would be an authentic context for writing in elementary, right? Like, even if it's not that they're going to make some big conclusion that they need to write to the PTA or the school board about, that they could write in a notebook for next year's class to have their information as they go out and track. I mean, that's definitely something scientists do.
Right, and taking pictures and putting that observation.
Yeah, I think that would be and I think that's a great use of science notebooks. That's a little bit more authentic than just, I have a science notebook. There's a website that I can send a link to that, given what you just described, might be a great project. I can't remember for sure if it's designed for 4th grade or 8th grade, But if it's for 8th grade, I think that it could be used with scaffolding with 4th graders. But the NAEP test, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, they created some interactive computer tasks a few years ago that they've released to the public, and they're fantastic. They really, really are fantastic. And one of them, I think at grade 8, is called Planning a Park. And I can send the link directly to it. I can't right now because I'm on my Mac, and I've never done GoToWebinar from my Mac before. I have no idea what's going on. But the Planning a Park one, it gives them a made-up scenario where there's a forest and they're going to build a park into the forest, and they have to look at what the impact on the animals who live there are, small animals. I mean, there's owls and stuff too, but small, like chipmunk type animals, and they look at different places that they could put it, and they look at the difference in population, and they think about when they build a park, when they design a park, when they figure out how they're going to create recreation space, how is it affecting the animals around them. And I would bet that that with scaffolding could kind of go with that conversation of our own outdoor space that we use, and how not just which flowers are growing more, but how is our presence affecting the animals that would naturally live here.
You know, I just went to that site because I have 2 computers going on, and they actually have for 4th grade they have an interactive for cracking concrete.
Yes.
And Here Comes the Sun and Mystery Plants. So they have some great ones.
Mystery Plants is great, and Pam has used that one before in her classroom, and I love Mystery Plants. I'm a big champion for Mystery Plants. But I think that one at grade 8, that Planning a Park, if you walked through it, you might be able to use it with scaffolding for 4th graders. It's not a huge jump in processing. I mean, if they were doing it in groups, the test was for them to do that alone as an individual, which at 8th grade I think that would be appropriate. But in groups, if you were dealing with the concepts in it, you could probably use that one too.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you for
sharing. Yeah, those are fantastic. And if you're on that web page, if you look right above where the tasks are, there's another tab that says hands-on tasks. And I can't remember what the grade 4 hands-on task is, but
circuits, electrical circuits.
So if that actually is set up that NAEP sent that to all the schools that were taking NAEP that year, and it's a completely fleshed out lab with a test booklet to go with it. Okay. That could be modified to kind of have especially for someone like you that's super familiar with the practices, to look at that as something that's more of a performance assessment of how well do my kids understand how to do labs so that I know what I need to be supporting them in. It's kind of an amazing resource to have it with the test booklet. I've never given I had to take them when I was in school, performance, like end of semester lab finals. I never gave one, but when I was looking through those, I thought, what a great resource to have something that's set up in the way that it's designed to assess their skill at doing a lab, especially to use formatively.
Yeah, and this year we've already been scheduled to take the NAEP test. We have our scheduled date.
And this year they're doing even more. We're really excited. The 2015 test is going to have even more interactive tasks for science. So after this test, when they release it, we're going to have a whole bunch more, even more complex in terms of their design, not the content. Even more of those interactive ones. I don't think they're going to do hands-on tasks again. I don't think they like doing it, but we're going to get some great new tasks out of this year's test.
Okay, great. Thanks for sharing that. I would have never seen that. So.
Yeah, it's one of those kind of hidden gems that people don't think to go look at a national standardized test for science resources.
That should be someone's resource.
So this question, I was just kind of thinking about how it, with our Indian Education for All mandate, we talk a lot about place-based learning, and I mean that's not the only context that it's important in. but I think that's one of the reasons why it's more of a hot topic in our state than other places. But I was thinking about how the idea of situated cognition relates to place-based learning, but I think that you already kind of answered that by describing how authentic writing tasks would be things like using the playground they go to every day to do their science, um, and understanding the place that they are living. Anything from the the muted peanut gallery? Ooh, Pam unmuted herself.
So one of my co-teachers and I, one of the fourth grade teachers, we were talking about, we have this program where we have healthy snacks this year, and we've started producing a lot of vegetable matter every day. And so we talked about maybe having the kids do some research about composting and maybe building a compost bin at our building. But some of the things we needed to do before we could do that would be to write to the city or have the kids, write to the city and say, are there any restrictions about where we can place a compost bin? Can there be one near a school building? And then the kids could, we could maybe try and find some funding to build it. And then what would we do with that compost? So it would be a overtime thing, but also something that would be authentic and usable at our building as well.
Yeah. And they would learn so much about their community in that process. I mean, things like where in the community might somebody need some compost. And like when I think about Helena, that would mean learning some things about what kind of activities are going on in the Helena Valley where compost might be useful. I mean, there's a lot of things and learning about the regulations in your community in terms of those. I don't know the social studies standards very well, but I know that in elementary, that's one of the goals, is to really understand the community you live in. That sounds fantastic. I know a child who can contribute some knowledge about compost bins.
One that might be in my classroom, you mean?
Yes. I know
Perfect.
a child whose job it is to decide if it goes to the chickens or the compost when it's left over.
Well, that's perfect. So, Sandy, we should share this with you, is that Chris's son is going to be in my class this year, so that's why we're chatting about that.
I think I figured that out.
Yeah, he was in my class in first grade, and now I teach third grade, and so he's going to be in my room this year, and he is a delight. So it'll be a great experience if Mrs. Robinson and I get together and have the kids work on this, because I think it would be a great thing to have the fourth graders and the third graders do together as well.
Absolutely, that sounds like so much fun. I think I might have to steal that idea. Because I could imagine, just in the spring having families come and getting some of the compost materials for spring planting, and just a true community project.
I would like to say that I can also imagine, not in a gross way, but that if the kids kind of like learn what goes in the compost, that it could actually become a family activity. If each kid had their own little bin that they could carry to school with whatever it is that they want to add from their home to the compost. I mean, things like lettuce and corn cobs and some of those things that might be being left over and thrown away, I bet you'd have kids that would think it was so cool to bring their little Rubbermaid container in to put in the compost.
That does sound like a lot.
I like that idea. I'll have to share that with Susan. We were particularly thinking about all the stuff we have left over at school, but I think that would be great as well. We were also thinking about the math aspect of it too, and for them to have to calculate, what would be the ideal volume of a bin or number of bins, that kind of stuff. I think it could be a fantastic project. I think we'll give it a try, depending on how long we're going to be at our current location. We could also move it to our new location or our old new location if we needed to do that as well.
Yeah, but you also might be able to get donations from somewhere like Murdoch's or Home Depot or Lowe's of the bins that are like a garbage bin, and they are where you would just, they could calculate how many they needed or whatever, but they're self-contained and you rotate them every day.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
If you could get those donated, they could still do some math calculations, but they'd be easy to move to a different location.
That's a good idea.
We have one of those at our house because we keep it in a different place in the summer and the winter because we don't like to have to shovel a pathway to it in the winter, so we bring it closer to the house.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Well, see, this is perfect. We have all elementary today. We don't have to talk about all the ways in which this might be different in high school. Let's see what the next question we wrote is.
Hey, Chris.
What environment? Oh, yes.
Before we go to the next question, I just had actually a comment and a question. So I just wanted to say that I like that we're discussing like setting up authentic environments, that, you know, we're kind of getting away from the games aspect, because I feel like sometimes the epistemic games, when we talk about it and people start thinking about video games and stuff, and not that those aren't valuable for learning like we were discussing. And I guess my question was, do you remember the name of the publication you were reading or who wrote it from MIT?
Yeah, it's a Daniel Schaefer. Schaefer, right?
Oh, is it David?
No, Schwartz. Daniel Schwartz.
Dan Schwartz. Okay,
Dan
that makes
Schwartz.
sense. Dan Schwartz. Just in case anyone was interested.
Yeah, I can get the link. The other thing that's really cool, actually, and I think this was the part that I told you about earlier, about that one, that what he wrote about is that he's developed a bunch of little gamelets, and his current kind of theory of research is this idea that that we should think more about the choices children make when they're learning, and try to find ways to assess what decisions that they're making as they learn, instead of worrying so much about what the outcome is, because the choices that they make as learners are more predictive of their long-term success than what they actually learned that day. So whether or not a kid actually learns the difference between additive and subtractive colors and how that relates to light and paint is far less important than the fact that they chose to study a chart instead of doing trial and error. Because if they study a chart, that I actually know that they're going to do a lot better in the long run, and that games provide a really great opportunity for us to look at some of those behavioral things that kids are doing, and take some of the pressure off of the outcome of knowledge that we often have in a traditional environment. So the first half of the book is about that, and then the second half of the book is about kind of the impact and influence of more traditional games. And I can look that up. Again, I can't figure out how to have my computer let me leave the PowerPoint.
Yeah, no, so, I don't worry about it. No, I just thought I'd bring it up in case people, others listening, were interested. And then, you know, I think that goes along with the epistemic perspective, right? Like the goal is that we're really trying to set up these authentic environments that we've been talking about, where people get to take on the roles of a scientist, or, you know, of someone who composts, or someone, you know what I mean? Like, it's more about like developing an identity, and like you were saying, what sorts of things do you do as this kind of person or someone in this role, you know? And so that's good, because I know like sometimes when you talk about like epistemic games, people get hung up on the games part, when it's really not as much about that as it is about creating this authentic environment to learn these kinds of skills. So anyway, I just think it's been a really fun conversation, and there's been lots of good resources that have come up so far.
And I think, thank you for bringing it back to that, because I think that's part of the value of the conversation about having the parents come at the end of the year and pick up compost if they have a use for it, or finding out kind of who in the community would use it, that you are then taking on the role of somebody who's providing, you know, like as if you're a business person that is providing not a service, goods, you know, what is it like then to do that? Or taking on the role then of collecting from your own house, teaching your own parents about what you should and shouldn't be bringing. It puts them into a really different role than just picking up from the cafeteria and taking to the compost and putting it on the garden beds at the end of the year. You know, it enhances kind of their different ways of engaging in their role in the environment. Okay. There are a couple more questions, but I made it end on accident. But I have to go back to listen to the speaker, otherwise I will definitely get in trouble, because he is, the speaker that we have here is Michael Fullan. I don't know if those of you who live in the world of education all the time know Michael Fullan. He is kind of a nationally recognized guru on leadership, and so I'm going to have to duck back out. Should I give control to somebody else, or do we want to say that we had a great and useful conversation and that we're done for the day?
I think it's up to Sandy, given that she's the only non-organizer among us. What would you like to do, Sandy?
It's up to you. I don't think I can be here next week, so I thought I want to make sure I'm here. I'll be in Sturgis, so I don't know that my computer will work.
You don't need to be here next week. We're talking about the framework next week.
Okay.
And you're an unpressed trainer, so I think you're good.
I know, but you know, I don't like to miss out, so we'll see.
Well, we'll post the recording.
Okay.
But,
either way, I could be fine, since there's, you know, maybe we could do this at another time, or.
Oh, I mean, I'm happy to stay, and I think Pam said she could stay as well. I know the next questions we're talking, kind of focusing on the idea of the communities of learners and communities of practice, and providing differentiation for students in that way. So, I mean, if you wanted to stay and continue to talk about that, we're happy to continue.
Sure, that would be great.
Okay, sounds good.
Fantastic. I just gave you the presenter, Sarah.
Got it.
Excellent. And I am going to leave. Thank you for joining. I feel inspired by our conversation today. Thank you for making my day, everybody.
Thank you, Chris.
We'll see you all later.
Bye.
Okay. So I think I need to share my screen. Can you guys see my screen now?
We could, and now we can't.
You can't? Okay. Now can you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I had it on and then I clicked it off, but now we're good to go again. So, like we were saying, we wanted to talk a little bit too about the communities of practice and communities of learners that kind of goes along with situated cognition. And this is sort of like, I guess, the mechanism by which learning would occur from this perspective. And I know with pre-service teachers that I've worked with, a lot of times they really like these ideas of, you know, situated cognition and also developing a community of practice, but they struggle to think about what that might look like in their own classroom. And so the first question that we had was just asking about what environments have you experienced that have the qualities of a community of practice. So I don't know, Sandy and Pam, if either of you have thoughts on that.
I was thinking about this morning. I had read this question yesterday, so I was thinking about it this morning. And, you know, this isn't in a school, certainly, but I was thinking about when my grandmother taught me how to bake pies and how she was, you know, I was the apprentice and kind of standing on the edge watching, and she was teaching me how to do it. And then as I got better at it and watched her and my mom do it, then I was able to be, you know, more involved in the community. And then I could take on the role as the master pie person, you know, and teach my kiddos as my sons, you know, as they watched, they could learn how to make a pie. So, I mean, that was just when I was reading about the Taylors. Was it Taylors that that one of the researchers watched
Mm-hmm.
and
Yep.
talked about. So I was thinking about that. So it wasn't necessarily a school environment, but it certainly was an environment that was a community of practice.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, taking on that kind of apprenticeship model, like you were saying, Pam, you're learning through participating in the process. And I think if I'm remembering the next question correctly here, maybe I'll skip ahead because I think like these two are very interrelated. So talking about, because you were talking about this idea of the legitimate peripheral participation, right? It's not that you jumped in right away and were baking pies yourself, but you got to do things that were still a part of making the pie, maybe adding the filling, or when you were talking about the tailors, they got to do things like ironing, things that still were important to the process and were legitimate, but they didn't, right? It takes time to develop mastery over a skill to be able to teach others. So thinking about this legitimate peripheral participation and how that might be able to provide differentiation for students. And like you said, the examples you were just talking about weren't necessarily in a school setting, but I'm just interested in especially your guys' perspective as teachers. Like, are there any sorts of things that you could see being able to set up or do with students in the science class that could allow for that differentiation so everyone is still able to participate in a legitimate way, even if they don't have complete mastery or complete skill over what they're doing?
I was kind of thinking of two things. The first thing when I was thinking about this was when I was in college and just pre-service teaching, my college did a lot of, with every methods class, we were in a classroom. And so we would start with just observing, and then we would have a small group, then we would have a larger group, and finally we would have the whole class. And it was really empowering, I think, as a pre-service teacher to do that for every methods class. So I just didn't have student teaching. We were out in the classroom all the time. And then I was kind of thinking about the example of the robotics class and how they shared it with it was either fourth or fifth graders. And I like to do that with activities for science. We've been studying how their height and their arm span compare, and then we take that study and go down with our first grade partners and do those same things. So we're gathering data and kind of showing the kids how to measure, and I think that works well as in my classroom with our partners.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, those are good points too that kind of we can relate back to the theory from last week as well, the social constructivist. So I'm sure you probably sensed as you were reading through things that social constructivism and situated cognition and this idea of communities of practice are really interrelated, because one of the big emphasis points in communities of practice is that we learn through observing, kind of like you're saying, we learn through observing others and gradually taking on more responsibility. So it does have that whole aspect of learning in the social environment, scaffolding or supporting less capable others, or maybe in this sense, the older students sort of supporting or scaffolding the younger students to learn how to do these sorts of things. So I think those are really nice examples. I'm just wondering too if anyone had, because I know, Sandy, you said you got at least partway through the community of learners. Was that helpful in terms of maybe thinking about how to facilitate these kinds of communities in your classroom, or what are your perspectives on it so far?
Well, the first part was really centering on the student's work is, to support students' learning and how to take control of the learning process. And it did share the one example of the classroom that they learned a lot about light, but then they missed information about sound because they couldn't get to it. So I was, kind of fluctuating on that, like thinking, well, how would that work? Or if we had two classrooms, one classroom might be really into, or one section might be really into that, and then the other classroom might be ready to move on, and just how I would deal with that as far as getting through material. It made me kind of think about how to structure that, I guess, in the classroom.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, and I think something that we run into when we talk about doing this sort of thing in the classroom or something like inquiry, and that you want to give students the time to sort of self-pace or to follow things that are interesting to them, but then that there are constraints on time and things that you need to get through. Definitely. I also, as you were talking, I was thinking about the whole idea with communities of practice being that there's like a shared interest or a shared goal, right? Students really, or learners really care about something together, and they're using each other as supports to get better at what it is that they're trying to do or to learn more. And I think that what you brought up previously, right, ideas about like thinking about what's going on on the playground, or maybe doing a community compost or something like that, might be really fruitful in terms of, having a shared goal or something that we care about together that we're working towards to kind of facilitate those communities. It's something that I would definitely share with my students if I end up ever teaching pre-service teachers again. I don't know, Pam, did you have anything else to add? Is there anything I'm missing that you were thinking about as you did the readings or watched the videos?
Not really. I was thinking, like you said, how much this is related to social constructivism, and then I thought, it depends on what project we're doing as to what the goal for that project is, and what the amount of time that can be given to it. And I too, Sandy, like you did, I really liked how that one class decided to just really go for it with the light and maybe didn't get to the sound. And I was kind of relating it to math instruction and thinking about if my students are engaged with one another, and if they're really interested in what they're doing and have some buy-in, sometimes the content isn't that important. It's more the process that they go through. And I see that in math, and I can see it in my science class. I was thinking about this last year when we were doing some engineering kind of projects, and how they all took longer than I had originally anticipated or even put aside time for, but the way the students interacted with one another, those skills were huge, and also very authentic as to how engineers work together and work through problems. So sometimes I think, we worry about the content that we have to teach, but those other skills are equally, if not more important, and I think are going to be more lifelong skills. I don't know. That's kind of what I was thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point.
The other thing I was thinking about the different groups. Like last year, I had a group of students who was so excited about learning that they could just, you could just take anything and they would just be excited about learning, where perhaps 2 years ago it was more oh, it was just trying to get the behavior to be acceptable was the biggest goal for that class, and it can really change with the group of kids that you have all day long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Let's see. I think I'll move to the last one. So it kind of ties back together. I think what we were talking about at the beginning of the discussion. So the question is, how do online authentic activities compare to real life ones? What are the advantages and disadvantages? And so, we can even think about it in terms of, like we were talking about, video games or online experiences versus setting up some sort of authentic context or doing something, um, in the, I hesitate to say real world, but you know what I mean, that you might be writing to a principal or the mayor, or having some more sort of real world consequences. So what are your feelings on the two different ways that we might go about setting up these environments, more real world versus more online or simulation based ones?
So, Sandy, the NAEP released the online activities that you looked at, and Chris had mentioned that I've used one of those. So the classroom that I'm currently in has one tiny little window, and I figured that we weren't going to be able to do much growing of plants this year, plus I just didn't have a space that would be even outside. I couldn't find a space that we could grow some plants and observe that life cycle this year. So that online activity in there about mysterious plants was really, it wasn't the most ideal environment. I would have rather had the kids do their own, decide what they wanted to do with the plants and what questions did they want to ask about them, and do their own investigation. But due to the constraints of my classroom and our physical space, even where in the rest of the building, I found that particular activity to be really valuable for my students. Plus, by the time they're in third grade or fourth grade like you have, they have some experience, some background knowledge. So I think that that activity really was valuable for them. And the other thing is, they're very motivated by screens. So the fact that they got to be in front of the computer and doing some stuff, and I put them in groups of two to work on that, they liked it, and they were all really engaged, and were able to we were able to talk about what they did and what they found out. Anyway, so that would be an advantage, I think, of an online activity.
Thanks
Yeah.
for sharing. That's a great example, because our classrooms do affect what we can do, and I think that that's better than nothing. I mean, having that interactive computer task, and your point that about having a screen is so important. They do love that in my class. No matter, I don't care if there's 6 of them around a screen, sometimes they're just excited to be there.
Yeah, I mean, that is a really good point. It can be motivating for them, and also fill in the gaps, because obviously we don't have the resources to be able to do everything we might like to, in not in simulation or online form. So it is great that we have those available to us. I'm just trying to think. I mean, can you think of any advantages or of in-person, or maybe disadvantages? Like, what, are there times when, yes, I would definitely want to do this in a real world setting versus an online setting, or I would definitely want to do this online versus in the real world?
I think whenever there's maybe a chance of danger, or something you can't do, like maybe the roller coaster, some of the roller coaster activities, something that's too hard or too difficult to do in the real world, where you can have an online activity that would be easier.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of roller coasters, that's a great point. I know, the curriculum that I've worked with, we have students design roller coasters and they do hands-on explorations, but they also do a lot of simulations. And obviously, in the simulation, you can eliminate things like friction and things that you can't obviously eliminate in the real world. The other thing I was just thinking of too, in terms of communities of practice, with online capabilities, is even thinking about connections that learners might be able to make outside of their community or to other similar or different communities that may be interested in the same thing, like composting, or what does our playground look like, the environment, like being able to make those connections and actually share resources and compare. That's obviously such an important thing now, in our interconnected world. I mean, we're having a meeting. I'm in Wisconsin and you guys are in Montana, and it's no big deal, and I feel like those are things that are motivating for students too, but also can help to kind of expand their communities and the way that they communicate with other people, because these are the kind of skills that obviously they're going to need moving forward into careers or into college.
Absolutely. I think I'm taking a class on Coursera too, and just on, what is it, copyright law. And
Mm-hmm.
it's amazing the different people that are grouped together. There's over 1,000 of us and we're all interested in that topic. Yet in that topic, there are also subgroups. And we've kind of talked about how some of us want a subgroup to talk about the topic, how it relates to us. And I could see kids getting excited about that and talking with someone across the country, and even how their playground is different than ours. Like playgrounds in parts of Florida are very sandy and they don't have any rocks, so it's not like the kids can go out and grab some rocks to look at or to discover. And I think that would be a great learning community. Let's do that.
Cool. Sounds like a good idea.
I like that as well. I think that would be really fun.
Yeah, no, I feel like it's just neat too to be able to communicate with people that you might not otherwise have an opportunity to learn things with or about. As kind of an aside, I was at a meeting recently on different sorts of educational technologies, and there was a group, I can't think of the name of it now, I'd have to look it up, but they were working on, so it's related to this idea of literacy and producing videos, right? So thinking about different ways to share content or to create a message. And they were working on a platform that would allow learners to easily create and edit and share videos across distances. So, maybe someone on the East Coast is working with a class on the West Coast or something like that, but they could all kind of add to this video and then create it and share it. And I just thought that was a really neat idea. I mean, not that something like that can't be done now, but it's not necessarily easy to do. And so they were working to streamline the process. Oops. Okay. So.
Even something like Google Docs, where you're creating something together, has been one of my favorite things. I worked with a bunch of fourth grade teachers in outside of Detroit, and we were just doing Common Core math, and we were creating a document and kind of a sequence of the Common Core. It was so awesome to just work together on this one document, yet we were in different places. So I could see that also happening for kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's neat that we're able to take our experiences and how motivating they were for us and to be like, oh, maybe that's something that I could apply in my classroom if I have access to the technology that could be motivating for the students as well. Because I think, like you've all been saying today in our discussion, it's not just the content, it's also the skills and the kinds of things that they're learning to do, right? The practices, things that the Common Core is really focusing on, that are really important, and learning how to create shared documents with others is a skill that is needed. So yeah, I don't know, I've really enjoyed this conversation today. It's made me very excited about some potential new ideas to move forward with my work as well. So very cool. I guess Pam or Sandy, do either of you have anything else to add or any other questions before we wrap up?
I don't think I do. This has been a great conversation as well. It's always nice to kind of get some ideas out there and think about how other people are working on that